All right, get ready, because we're taking a deep dive today
Yeah.
into what makes a woman think about a man.
Ooh, interesting.
We're going to be dissecting this YouTube video by a relationship coach who goes by Queen Carine.
Okay.
The video's title, it's in French, Comment faire pour qu'une femme pense à vous? 4 strategies pour y arriver. Hashtag relation. Hashtag couple,
Wow.
which translates to how to make a woman think about you. 4 strategies to achieve it. So
Right.
we'll be looking at her advice and, see if there's anything that we can maybe apply more universally
Yeah.
about attraction and connection.
It'll be interesting to see if, like, her perspective is more culturally specific or if it
Right.
kind of, resonates across different cultures.
Definitely. And whether you're dating or just trying to understand people better,
Yeah,
I think this will be pretty useful.
for sure.
Okay, so Karine's main message is that it's not about these big gestures or like, trying to impress someone with like a fancy car or something.
Yeah.
It's the little details that really make a man unforgettable.
And
She really emphasizes creating these like unforgettable moments. And she specifically compares like a deep, meaningful conversation with like, let's say, an expensive dinner.
okay. Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting because it kind of relates to how we remember things, right? Like,
Yeah.
we remember experiences that are tied to, like, strong emotions.
Right.
So a conversation that makes you feel seen or understood, that can be really powerful and kind of stick with you.
I mean, think about it. You might not remember what you had for dinner last week.
Exactly.
A conversation that really sparked a connection will probably stick with you.
And, I also think she's kind of challenging this idea that you have to spend a lot of money
Yeah.
to impress someone. Like, it's really not about the superficial stuff. It's more about creating that genuine connection.
So maybe we're all overthinking it.
Maybe.
Just focusing on the surface and not the substance.
It's easy to get caught up in that.
Okay, so her second strategy is about being authentic and memorable in your authenticity.
Okay, that sounds a little
Yeah, it's a little bit.
riddle-like.
Yeah, a little bit of a riddle. But she's basically saying, like, be genuine, but showcase that authenticity in a way that makes you stand out.
Gotcha.
So, for example, she uses the example of, like, a guy who loves basketball
Okay.
and how he could talk about that in a way that would actually make a woman interested in basketball, too.
So not just like, oh, yeah, I like basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like, really conveying...
Yeah, the contagious passion.
Yes.
So is that really about having genuine passion, or is it more about, like, communication skills?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both, right? Like, you need to actually have that genuine spark, but
Yeah.
you also need to know how to express it.
So you can't fake it till you make it.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And, that kind of brings up another question. Like, how do you figure out what you're passionate about in the first place?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Maybe we can do a deep dive on that sometime.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. Okay, so Queen Carine's third strategy is all about showing confidence, but by creating moments of absence.
Okay.
This one might be a little controversial, especially nowadays.
Especially with, like, texting and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're supposed to be constantly available.
Right, but she's suggesting that, like, actually pulling back a little bit can make you more attractive.
Interesting.
What do you think about that?
I mean, it's definitely a classic piece of advice, but it's tricky because
Yeah,
on the one hand, you don't want to seem like you're not interested.
right.
But on the other hand, you don't want to be like, suffocating.
Right.
So it's kind of like finding that
Yeah, like that balance.
balance.
So she specifically talks about, like, giving a woman space after a date instead
Yeah.
of just, like, blowing up her phone,
Right.
like just letting her miss you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for like a little bit of mystery,
Right.
you know?
So it's not about playing hard to get. It's just
Yeah.
about,
I don't think so.
yeah.
It's more about like, giving the other person space to
Yeah.
breathe.
So how do you find that sweet spot between showing interest and giving someone space?
It's a good question. I think it depends on the person,
Yeah.
and like what they're looking for.
So you have to be able to read the room.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to the cues.
Right.
If they seem eager to chat, then go for it.
Yeah.
But if they seem like they need some space,
Yeah.
then give them space.
It's like reading the texts.
Exactly.
So before we move on to her final strategy,
Mm.
what do you think about this whole idea of moments of absence?
I think it's one of those things that can be easily misinterpreted.
Right.
Like what one person sees as giving space, another person might see as disinterest.
Right.
And I think cultural norms play a role too.
Oh, definitely.
Like what might be considered playing it cool in one culture could be seen as rude in another.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then you also have individual personalities too, you know? Like some people are just naturally more communicative than others.
So it's all about figuring out what works for both people.
Yeah, communication is key.
Definitely. Okay, so before we get too deep, let's pause here and come back to this idea of putting yourself in a woman's shoes in part 2.
Sounds good.
We'll explore what that really means and how it can change your approach to dating and relationships in general.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
You know, it's interesting to think about all this stuff, like in the context of modern dating.
Yeah.
Like with all the apps and social media and everything, it's like we're so used to instant gratification now.
Right.
But what Karen's saying is that, like, real connection,
Yeah.
it takes time
Yeah.
and effort.
And this whole idea of putting yourself in a woman's shoes,
Yeah,
it sounds simple,
right.
but it's actually pretty deep.
It is, yeah. It's like going beyond just the superficial stuff
Yeah.
and really trying to understand where they're coming from.
So it's not just about listening to her words.
Right.
It's about like getting her perspective.
Yeah, like understanding her values and her
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah. And like how all that shapes her view of the world.
Exactly.
You know, it makes me think about all the times I've like totally missed the mark when I was trying to connect with someone.
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe I was too focused on what I wanted,
Mm-hmm.
or like I was making assumptions based on my own experiences.
Yeah, easy to do that.
Instead of actually listening to her.
Yeah. Yeah, we tend to project our own stuff onto other people.
Yeah. So how do we avoid doing that?
I think it starts with really listening, like active listening.
Okay.
Paying attention to not just what they're saying, but like their body language too.
Okay.
And asking questions.
So not just like nodding and saying, uh-huh.
No, you got to really engage
Yeah.
and try to understand.
Like what's behind the words.
Yeah, and also remembering that everyone has their own story,
Mm-hmm.
like their own experiences that have shaped who they are.
So it's about being curious
Yeah.
and being open to learning.
And humble. Like recognizing that you don't know everything
Right.
and that their perspective is just as valid as yours.
Man, this is making me rethink my whole approach to dating.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, this doesn't just apply to dating.
No, it applies to any relationship.
Right. Like with your friends, your family.
Your coworkers, everyone.
Yeah. Being able to see things from their point of view.
It's so important.
It's like the foundation of any strong relationship.
I agree.
Okay, so going back to Carine,
Yeah.
she was saying that like doing things for a woman
Mm-hmm.
can actually lead to being friend-zoned.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
I think it might come across as trying to earn affection
Okay.
rather than like building a connection.
Yeah, like you're trying to buy your way in.
Yeah, and it kind of implies that you don't see them as an equal,
Right.
like you're trying to do things for them instead of with them.
So she's saying that like men should actually focus more on conversation
Yeah, like engage with them on an intellectual level.
instead of trying to impress them with gifts and stuff
Exactly, because that's where real connection happens.
when you're sharing ideas.
Yeah, and exploring each other's thoughts and feelings.
But some people might say that actions speak louder than words.
Sure, but I think both are important.
Yeah.
It's just that men tend to overemphasize actions, especially early on.
Yeah, like we're trying to prove ourselves.
Right, but a strong relationship needs to be built on something deeper.
Like mutual respect, shared values,
Oh my God,
things
uh-huh.
like that.
Yeah, and even though she's talking to men specifically,
Yeah.
I think this applies to everyone,
Definitely. We could all learn from this.
for sure.
So focusing on conversation helps us uncover those little details that Karen talked about.
Yeah, those little moments of connection,
Yeah.
that's where real intimacy comes from.
It's not about the grand gestures. It's about the small moments.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think this leads perfectly into our next point about authenticity and how to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
All right, so Queen Karen said it's not enough to just be yourself. You have to be authentic and memorable in your authenticity.
Yeah, that's a good one. How do you do that?
Right. That's the question.
It's like finding that balance between being genuine
Right.
and also like standing out.
So it's not about trying to be someone you're not. It's about like amplifying the things that make you you.
Exactly. Like letting your personality shine through.
Okay. But how do you do that without seeming like you're trying too hard?
Right. It's a good question. I think it takes a bit of self-awareness.
Okay.
Like, what are your strengths? What are you passionate about?
So knowing yourself.
Yeah, and then finding ways to like weave those things into your conversations.
Okay. So it's not about like listing off all the great things about yourself.
Oh, no.
It's about letting them come out naturally.
Right. Like, think of it like storytelling. You wouldn't start a story by saying, this is going to be a really interesting story.
Right.
You would start with something that hooks the listener.
Okay. So how do you do that like on a date?
Just be present. Be engaged in the conversation.
Okay.
Ask questions,
Mm.
listen, share your own experiences.
So it's not about trying to impress her.
No, it's about connecting.
Yeah, and sometimes the best moments are the ones you don't plan.
Exactly. Like those moments of spontaneous laughter,
Yeah.
or when you share something vulnerable.
It's like that saying, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
Exactly.
So bringing it all back to Queen Carine,
Yeah.
it's not about playing games. It's about being your best self.
Being someone who naturally draws people in.
Yeah, being memorable.
Exactly.
Huh.
And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Yeah, if you want to make someone think about you, just focus on being your most authentic self.
And the rest will follow.
Such great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was fun.
We hope you learned something new. And remember, the most important thing is to be true to yourself
Absolutely.
and let your best qualities shine through.